Okay, so I think the final piece of detail on this, the real bit of detail. I mean, there's a lot of filleting around the edges, which it would be fairly straightforward. But there's this on the mesh there. We've got these holes here, these intakes. So I wanted to have a look at those today, and I realised, as is so often the case when you start to look at these things and realise you've got to put some detail in, that one of the little tiny problems possibly is that we've got this line going across here, which obviously needs to be a nice smooth aperture, needs to be a nice smooth edge to it, and it's actually running across some surfaces here where we've got a bit of a, it's washing out to virtually nothing, but it is actually still stepping over those surfaces. And another one wherein, looking at it now, I think really I should have moved that line up to here, because then we could have washed it out before it hits that edge. Otherwise we might get a wobble in that edge, but hopefully it'll be so small that we won't really notice for this. But another one where, if it was A class, then I would go to the trouble of moving that edge up here. I'm not going to do that because that's a lot of work to do. But yeah, that would be the ideal, because otherwise we're going to have a little bit of a wobble through that area, and we can't avoid that. It's just something we'll have to live with for this model. But so on these, the other thing about this is that we've got, because we've deviated slightly from the scan in lots of respects, we haven't stuck to it religiously. You can see that it's slightly different. When I put in, if I put in that line there, for example, for the top of that aperture, and I do it in, say, in plan view, I'll project it down there, but in front view it will be in a slightly different place because of the difference between the scan and the surface, and that's very common. You just have to, it's the important thing, of course, is the design intent rather than exactly where it is. So if we end up with that line slightly in a different place, it doesn't actually matter at all. But it's just something that will happen when we do this. Sometimes there's an obvious view from which we want to make sure that we absolutely get this line correct in a particular view. In this case, I don't think it really matters which one we choose. I think the lines, they do need to follow this edge here in the plan view, I would say. So in the front view, we'll hopefully get a straightish line, and in the, like we have here, and in the plan view we'll have a curved line. But whenever you project it onto a curved surface, you're always going to get something slightly different to what you might want. You might have to adjust it to deal with that. But so let's go into this top view, and I'm going to see if I can find a plane, my top plane, which I set up ages ago, which is Z1500, and so we can have a look at that. And we're going to do set CP for that one, and put the grid on so I can see where we are. So we're above the geometry. Just helps, it's completely parallel to world space. It just helps when we build the curves that they are guaranteed to be above the geometry. And so we'll put a curve in here. Well, actually, I'm going to take this edge here and duplicate that first of all. So in fact, it's not above the geometry when I do that. And once again, as always, I need to switch off interactive, so I just get the edges there. So I'm going to pick those two curves there. They are absolutely on the edge. So really I should go and just put all those, just for tidiness, bring that up and use Alt with the right mouse button just to snap them onto that Z value so that they're above the geometry. And we ought to put this in a proper layer. So I'm just going to create a new layer, and rather than worrying about what the numbers are, if you just put curves in, strangely enough, I've never used curves before as a layer name, or that particular name. I've got curve 0, 2, etc. But rather than keeping track of what those are, you can just call it curves. And if there was a duplicate, it just puts a hashtag 2 on the end or something. And so with that, curve, we can now offset that. So if we go into offset that curve there, make sure I pick the curve and that one as well. Actually, it won't let me pick both of them. And I'll just go up to there and see what that value is. So it says 28. So let's just make that 287 so that we can then pick up the next one. Where's that gone? Gone the wrong way. Interestingly, goes the other way. So I've just tried to line it up with where the mesh is there, and to keep this simple, we really want to make that into one curve rather than two curves. So I'm just wondering if I try and extend that, delete the history, whether it's close enough. It is, so we can get away with just one curve. It just, if you've got two curves, then we're going to be splitting that up, and it's completely unnecessary. It's going to split up anyway when we go over here, so we don't want extra splits where we don't need them. Now, if I try and project that lot onto those surfaces, I mean, the other downside, of course, is of having this detail in here is we end up with multiple curves there, which we don't really want, but it's sort of probably unavoidable. Let's see what happens when we do that. So I think, to be completely safe, because this has got to be symmetric, I should make sure that is symmetric. I know I've offset it from there, which should be symmetric, but we ought to make sure that that's symmetric by putting symmetry on. And otherwise we'll build all of this and it will not quite be right. I mean, the center one we could build as a half model. Because it's so small, you could build it as a half model rather than trying to build it as a full width model. I'm not sure. I haven't decided really which way I'm going to do that, but I might well build that as a half model. So let's project this on. So I've got curves on. I can say match original. In other words, it's going to use the degree of those that curve there, the original curve, and we'll project it in the Z direction. And it says the deviation there is 0, pretty much. Now I've either missed picking that one or it's just ignored it. One of the two. Let me just go and pick that surface and just see whether it's ignoring it. It doesn't really matter if it's ignoring it, because we can easily build something in there. I don't know why it would be ignoring it. Yeah, it's ignoring that one. And one possibility, it's strange that it's ignoring it, but I think it could be to do with the size of these. Now that was my original ones, wasn't it? So let's get rid of that. That's just confusing. It could be to do with the size of this, that if we made that smaller, then it might well project. Another way of getting around that is if it doesn't project. So I've got that surface there, which I'm pretty certain is just a trim converted one, which it is. So what we could do, what might also work, is if you absolutely wanted that curve in there exactly where that is, we could go into trim convert, open that menu up because it seems to have closed itself, project that in the Z direction, and have keep originals on. This hopefully will work. So if I do that, it comes up with the curve on surface, and it's created as a second, a duplicate of the original, and then we can just put a curve on that edge, which is exactly the same as projecting it really as a curve. So I've created that curve. Now I can get rid of that surface, which I just created simply to get us that curve, which wouldn't project for some reason. But the other solution, I think in this case, might be to take that curve down there, copy it. So Control C, Control V. I'll move it down out of the way. I'm just going to see if this would work, just out of curiosity. So I'm going to make that into a template just so we don't have to look at it, and just see whether if we were to make this a lot smaller. Oh, God. got symmetry on there, so I need to break the history on there because it won't let me do it otherwise. I made that a lot smaller and then try projecting it. I've seen this where it happens, where it will work. Yeah, so that's created as a curve as well. So there's two alternative methods there if you found it wasn't projecting. So because that curve was so big compared with this geometry, it obviously struggled for some reason. I'm going to get rid of those and I'll just use that. The better solution actually is this one, the one where I did the trim convert, because the beauty of that is that that curve should be exactly on that surface. So technically speaking, it's slightly better. Having said all of this, if we look at that, you can see, that we have actually got a bit of a wobble in that, and that's inevitable because we're projecting onto surfaces which have got an S in them at this point. And like I said, if we moved this up to here instead and washed it out before then, we wouldn't have that issue. It's quite small, but you can see it doesn't look great going through there. So if we had lots of time, I would say that we should fix that, because I don't like that at all. Probably zooming in closely to it, you can see that it doesn't look good, and it is because this doesn't wash out. And the problem with it is that it's that surface and that surface. To get them to wash out earlier, I'd have to modify these surfaces so that they coincide down here. So we'd have this sort of situation where these are completely curvature continuous, and you can imagine that's quite a bit of work. So I think I'm just going to have to live with this as it is, and if when we build it, it still looks horrible, then I will have to think about doing that in the future. But for now, I'm just going to go with that. I don't know whether there's a way in which I could make that look a little less horrible, because obviously I'm projecting it out from the Z direction. So if we look at that from the left view, we might be able to do it so that the trouble is, because I'm projecting from the Z, it's coming down at an angle and therefore exaggerating that angle even more. We could minimize it slightly if we were to sort of project it from this sort of direction, if that makes any sense. I'm going to see if we can do something with that just to reduce the size of that as much as we possibly can. So if we could project it more normal to the surface rather than from the Z direction in that area, that might help. So let me see if that's possible. And so if we did an extend on here, I'm just extending the curve that's projected. That's really not going to help. I'll take that back to there. Oh, one more, so that's there. If we look at it from the front, what's that look like? I'm wondering if there's an angle where that's pretty straight, because that would be an easy thing to do then. So if I just put in, I'm going to put in a straight line there, which wasn't what I wanted to do. Let me undo that. So because I'm not in a particular view, it's going off the weird angle there. So I'm going to align that just in tangency. So at least we know it tans into that end, to the projected curve there. Now where's that gone? Let me revert that. I'm trying to align that to the end of that. And what's going on there? G0, G1. So we've just gone the other way. Now it's all gone completely. Oh. Nope, it's disappeared. That's very, oh, something is weird is going on, because even my graphics have disappeared here. So I think it's going to be one of those where I just have to crash Alias to go back to that one. Fortunately, I've saved it 3 minutes ago. I think we've got it. Right. So let's make the transparency a little bit higher on the meshes so that it's not quite so difficult to see there. Yes, so what I was trying to do was put in that straight line. So trying to put in a straight line from here to somewhere else here, or not, as the case may be. Let's just move that out of the way. Oh, doing very well here. Let's get rid of that. It's because I'm not in the top view, so it's put that on a different layer. So I'm just calling that curves 2D, so I don't have to look at that when I go into the top view. And then, yeah, so I was going to put in a straight line there and align it, which would be perfectly fine. There is another way of doing that, actually. That would work. I think it was just the graphics failed for some reason. So if I go linear without merge on with extend, this is another way of creating that straight line. So that's now tanned into that point there. So if we rotate that around, rotate the view around, we might get to a point where that looks pretty much. So when you do that, you can see how much that other line dips down. And of course, you can do it in a view, but as soon as I project it onto those surfaces, we'll still have the dip, but it's just trying to minimize that dip as much as possible. So I could rotate that around until it's a sort of best fit. Now our mesh, what's happened to our mesh? Our mesh is still there, apparently, but I seem to have lost the upper part of the mesh. Can't be any of these things. Oh, unless I don't know what's happened there. As it's gone into a layer. Oh, for goodness sake, what's going on? Right, I'm going to just have to open this up again. Open recent, that one, delete that. Sure, the mesh was there. Maybe I just accidentally deleted it or something. I don't know what happened. Pick that object, layers, select layers by picked object, body upper, that's where it should be. Okay. You do find you get quicker the second time round when these things happen. So I'm going to make that curves 2D, and I'm going to put that curve there because I don't want to delete it into this layer. And I would increase the transparency on the mesh so it doesn't get in the way. And then we go into top view, and then we'll use, this time I will do it by curves, just picking that point. So just the alternative way of doing it. That one into there, which now works, thank goodness. So the same result, but just another way of doing it. So you can use extend, or you can put a line in like this, and then we can rotate that until it's a sort of best fit to that area. Now the only area I'm interested in is only up to here, which is the aperture. Which looks so different from this view. Now it's actually so different in this view that I'm thinking that line actually is in completely the wrong place anyway. But this is what happens because the mesh and the surfaces aren't quite the same. I'm slightly concerned that that's so far different. I'm very concerned that that's so far different. So what's happening here? Have I accidentally moved that to mesh or something? Or have I just put that line in completely the wrong place? Looks about the right. Oh no, stupid. I've done this completely wrong, haven't I was looking at the back of that mesh thinking that's the aperture. The aperture's down here. And I was a bit surprised how big this gap was. So let's get rid of those curves completely and do this again. Because I was a bit surprised how big a step there was. Because when I did this before and sort of having a look at it before, it wasn't anything like as bad as that. So I've got this curve in completely the wrong place. Right, so now we need to take it back to here. So this will have far less of a step in it. Thank goodness for that. Right, so if we offset that, so I'm using this offset function, doesn't really matter which one you use. And I want to offset that to about there, actually, I think, by those things. Now, have I got history on? Yes, I have. So I can come out of here. I'm going to pick those curves. I'm going to pick that mesh just so I can see it more clearly. That seems to be spot on in that view. So that's okay. So now let's project that on. Get rid of those CVs there. Don't need that anymore. This one, we need to make sure it's symmetric. So although it should be symmetric, there's nothing like making sure it's symmetric. And then we'll project that on in this view. So surface edit, project, curves, Z, project it on, see if we get all of those curves. Now, because I wasn't quite in the top view, so we've got another little area. For some reason, this time it doesn't like that surface, which is very strange, but just the way it is. So that can go into curves 2D, and I'm then going to do copy C, Control C, Control V, just drag that down, and then we'll do what I did before, which is extend that, make it much shorter, except that it's got symmetry on, so I need to delete the history, make that much shorter. This is so much trickier than I thought it was going to be, only because I've made a big mistake by putting the curve in the wrong place. That really didn't help. And so let's go and pick that surface and then pick that. So exactly the same, it's just that it likes that shorter curve, it didn't like the longer curve. I can get rid of that. And these curves we want to put into our curves layer. And then I can just switch off that layer so we don't have to look at the curve that this all come from. Now, if we look at that from the front view, so it's been projected down in Z and it's onto a surface where we know there's a bit of an S going on. That's much better. So there is a little bit of an S there. You can just about make it out, but it's tiny compared with what we had before, where it was further up. But when you look along it, it doesn't look so great either. We might be able to fine tune that and make that a little bit better, but we'll never get rid of it because of the surfaces it's sitting on. But I'll try the same trick again of putting in that line, and then trying to build a solution that's a little bit better than that. Because if I look at that from the side, when we're dropping that down in the Z direction, it's such a slope there that really that's probably not the direction to drop it in. Now I put it in a straight line before. I'm going to do that again. So I'm going to use Object Edit, extend once more. So linear, no merge, just to give me that straight line off the edge as a separate element there. So we'll do that. And then what we'll do, so I can rotate that around and try and get best fit. That's one option. The other possibility that we can do there is we put in a draft surface off that. So if we take a draft surface and we put it in Z and I'll put history on here. And so we just start off with that. It's got 2 surface on, so we need to switch that off so it actually works. And I'll put in a sensible length like 100 or something, maybe even less than that, 50. And we've got history on there, so we can rotate this. So we can then look at the intersect between that and these surfaces here, and that will give us an idea of what the quality of this is like in terms of the don't want project, I want intersect here. So with intersect, again, if I put history on and I do it on first surface, it doesn't really matter which one we do, but we do that surface and then these surfaces in here. So there's our intersect. Let's take all of the controls off so we can see a bit clearer. So that's the intersect there. So if I go back into query edit this MS Draft surface, we can then rotate that until we get something that looks better in terms of the shape of that. I mean, I'm looking at the shape of that and thinking, how does that across there will be this sort of SE area, we can't avoid that, and you can see that in there, but we might be able to just get that looking a little bit better. Now the length of the aperture only comes to here. And well, the other thing that we want to look at actually is what does this look like in front view. If I squash that up, it might be easier to see. So there's our intersect there. The aperture only comes to about this point. Really, we want that in that view. See, very different, unexpectedly different, I think, to because that's where the aperture is on the mesh. But I'm not saying that's correct, of course, because I think it should actually curve up more to follow. It doesn't follow the front edge really. It just follows the general sort of shape. There would be no harm in that actually curving up slightly. But yeah, I don't know whether this is actually helping, to be honest, because there's the intersect. We can see that curving up. It's difficult to see it, to be honest. In fact, I've gone completely around the wrong way now, so we haven't got an intersect. So I'm just going to get rid of that. I don't think that was particularly helpful. Sometimes it might be, sometimes it's not. Maybe if I go and pick these curves in here and not that one, and I'll just project that on in that view and just see what that looks like. There's always a lot of toing and froing in these sort of areas, and it's not helped by the fact that I'm going over this SE bit at all. So if on this one we've only got straight lines, so match original is not going to give us a proper projection here. But we'll project it anyway. So it says maximum deviation 2.35, and that's because it's keeping the degree 1, which obviously we don't want. So we have to do curve fit, and that lets us put in a higher degree. I might as well put in degree 7, then gives us maximum of 0. Now that looks perfectly fine there, but as soon as you rotate it, you will see there's a bit of a dip down, but that is what is inevitable. We can't avoid it with the shapes that we've got. So that's what we're getting from there. The other thing that we could try, so that sort of starts to drop down there. So I think we've just got to make that degree 2, and actually, I don't know whether I did that correctly. Yes, I did. So we just lift that point up a little bit. So we are deviating from the mesh, but that's what I think we need to do. So I'm just going to get rid of that lot and see what happens if we project that in that direction. So we'll do that in X. Again with curve fit on. So we've got very low deviation, although that was surprisingly high, 0.05. That's because I've got degree 2 on. working very slowly there, which is slightly worrying. Let's make that degree 5, so it's definitely 0 then. And then we'll look at that in the top view and see what we end up with there. Take non-proportional scaling off. So it's slightly different. It's not a pure offset in this area from this front edge in that view. Like I say, it has to deviate from the, it's going to deviate from the mesh. We can then rotate that in 3D. Let's just get rid of that for a second. I'm just making it invisible, and we'll take all of the CVs off. To rotate that around. So when you zoom in, and we're in this zoomed up sort of non-proportional scaling, that looks pretty good. It's actually, there is this inevitable joggle in there because of the surfaces it's sitting on, but it doesn't look too bad. So I think we'll go with that. Otherwise we'll never get this done. Okay, so now we want to, I'm going to start off with this one because that doesn't go over so many surfaces, which might be easier, hopefully. So this one, we want this sort of shape in here. It's going to be symmetric, so we've got to put it on the, we can start off with a circle, I would, in an area like that. It sort of looks like it's more or less a circle. I'm going to toggle back to our model space so that we're in that normal orientation. And we just put a circle in. So I'll go into circle. As we've set these up before, we got it, I just leave it as 360. I just delete the bits I don't want. I'm going to end up 4 segments, degree 7. Not that the accuracy matters, because it's not a circle that we're going to end up with, but we start off with that, and then we can just delete the top 2 bits because we won't need those. In fact, if we're going to build this as a half model, then we only need 1/2 of that arc, to be honest. Now, before we do that, you know, we've built surfaces across the center line because that's the quickest way of creating these surfaces across, is to do it across the center line. When you come into the little details, it's less critical about whether you do it as across the center line or not. Once you get onto the fillet detail, especially, what you want to do is have a half model and then fillet 1/2 and then mirror the whole thing across, rather than filleting all the way along there. That wouldn't make any sense, because then you've got a really difficult job trying to mirror the bits that you want and leaving the bits that you don't want. So it's much better to at this stage to split that down the middle. So if I go into the plan view there, you can do this by, so these ones here, I'm going to just trim those to the center. So trim, not trim convert, very important. So because then we can get back to the original surfaces if we should ever want to. Now you can do it 2 ways. You could put in a straight line there and then trim to that by projection, or you can use a section. Doesn't really matter which way you do it, but if I put sections on there, and you can go and put sections on there and then change that parameter. So if I said 1,000, then it's going to be very clear which is the center of that. So really surprisingly, it's there because we've got so much of that surface exposed still. And if I go into surface edit, now I can never remember whether it will work off this section or not, actually, but I don't want project on, I want trim on. So project in the Z direction, Z or normal, it doesn't matter, and we go and pick that. Yeah, it does let me pick the sections, and then we just keep that bit, and we could do it that way. So that's one way of doing it with the sections, or you can do it by putting a straight line in between grid points and then projecting upwards. Now I hope that I haven't made any stupid mistakes. I know I had to correct one early on, and just pray that hasn't actually reoccurred, but I would do that. And then I don't want to do this check because this is something you don't want to know. Hooray. So if that doesn't come up, oh, that's taking so long. Sometimes it seems to take a long time to do things. There we go. Phew. So that means I did have symmetry on. Again, it's one of those things I'm pretty certain I did, but then I was pretty certain before when I got it wrong. So you can never check too many times, to be honest. So now we've got that half model in there, or half the surfaces, and so when we've put all the detail on, we'd be able to mirror the whole thing across, and it'll all join up in the middle, hopefully. And so this is the curve I was looking at here, and we want to, so we only need half of that curve because we're only going to create half of this. And what we'll do there is just bring that down in the Z direction. Now it's probably way off in the X. I'm just going to move it in front of the geometry, or we could snap it to that curve, I suppose, and then we can put the pivot point on that end there, and then we could scale that to there. No, it doesn't. Looking at that shape, it actually isn't quite. It's not actually like an ellipse or an oval shape. It's part of that. If we then move it up to where the mesh tells me that it should be, and then we scale it again non-proportionally in this direction. So that looks more like it. That's about the shape that we've got there. So now we've got, we can now project that on in the front view. So I'm using curves here to do it rather than curve on surface. The reason for using curves as opposed to curve on surface is that it means that we can, when we put surfaces in, they'll be off these off the curve and not the curve on surface. And in general, it's a better way of doing things because you then have control over the degree. When you do it off a curve on surface, you might find that you end up with a more complicated result. Obviously, we do need curves on surface at some point because we've got to trim this out eventually. But now this curve here that goes across there, and we don't need to keep that all the way across. We just need the half curve there. So let me just trim that back so that it doesn't matter actually, does it? So I've got that, and also this one we can trim to there just to make it easier to see. One of the problems that I can see on this mesh that we're going to have potentially is when we come to fillet it, and the problem that I see is that we've got very much a knife edge on the top there. That's such a knife edge that we've got, this comes down at one angle and then it goes back on itself at a very sharp angle. And if we fillet that, even with a tiny fillet, the fillet's going to cut away loads of surface. So we won't end up with the edge looking as though as it does here. It'll be way back. Now that we can it means either we move that block surface downwards until the fillet looks right, or we could angle the block surface so it's not quite as sharp as that for when we put the fillet in. I'm not sure what we're going to get, and therefore I'm going to use history as much as possible so that we can change the angles of these surfaces if we need to. Well, we inevitably will need to, I'm sure. Now, of course, when you do, so we can do an MS draft. This one, I'm just going to take that straight back in X. And the reason that's doing something weird is because the draft angle is currently not aligned, it's not 0. And we want to swing that around the other way, so flip surface, and I'll make that as big as necessary. It doesn't matter how long that is, to be honest. So we do that with that, and I'll keep history on in case we need to change the angle of that. This one shouldn't be such a problem at all because we've just got a fairly regular, well, it's quite an open angle there. There should be no problem with the fillets there. And but this one will be interesting to see what that does. And this one also I'll do in X for the time being because that's what it says on the mesh, but with history on. And We'll take those CVs off. We don't need to look at those particularly. And then we can put in some fillets. So I don't know what size fillets these are going to be. If these are small fillets, then often rather than doing G2 curvature fillets, we can actually do G1 circular if they're very small. And I suspect they will be very small. And we can still make them controlled by the caudal length, or we could make them rather than the caudal length, we could just go for the radius, which will give us a different result. So I'll do that with radius to start with. So we say if we wanted a radius of, I don't know, 3 mil, which may well be too small, I don't know, and make sure these are on default. I've got history on, continuity check, bearing in mind this is only tangent because it's G1 circular, and we'll do this. What you'll find in big car companies, when the fillets get below a certain size, they, in their standards, even the A class, they will say we'll just go with radius fillets, because really at that size you can't really see that it's not curvature continuous. I think I'll make that a little bit bigger. Let's make that 5 mil. So what we've got set up there, when I said radius rather than caudal, instead of it controlling the distance between that point and that point, it's actually just controlling the radius. So if I go and pick that surface, we'll see a completely constant curvature going across there. When we look at the comb, let's bring the scale down. So you can see it's completely constant. It's only tangentially aligned. If I put min and max on, we should see 5 mil everywhere. So that's what that's doing. Now the thing is with having a constant radius is that if the angles of the surfaces change a lot, then you'll see that necks in. You can't see it here. The angle is pretty constant, but it can. You can find that the fillet comes and goes, the edges come and go. Because I've got history on there, I could just go and play with that. So if we tried instead arc chord, now it's going to pick up this distance. So if I said the caudal length was 5, we get a completely different result. Not that you can see it here, but you can see the curvature there varies. So it's going from 7.9 something to 7. But because this, when we say chord, it's controlling that distance there. It's keeping that constant. And often that's what we want. But if you're talking about very small fillets, then often we'll go for radius and set the radius value and just say that that's what we want. So I'm going to do that here. When you've got G1 circular fillets everywhere, you might think that it's actually easier to align things, but it's actually more difficult, because when you get into corners especially, it's much more critical than G2, which used to surprise me when I was first learning surfacing, but it's one of those things that G2 is actually easier to align than G1 when you get into the corner details and things. So I'm going to use the same fillet size on here, and we'll see what happens, because this is a quite sharp edge there. So I need to make sure my normal's around the right way, otherwise I'm going to get the wrong fillet. Now you can see that how much that cuts that back. So we've set up our line here, but it's cut it right back to here. And also that fillet looks enormous compared with this one, but actually when we measure the radius of that, it's exactly the same. It's 5 mil, and that's what happens when you've got a completely different angle between the surfaces. So one way around that would be to say, right, let's make that a smaller fillet. Let's make it 3 mil, and actually that's a lot closer in terms of size. I mean, in terms of the bottom edge there, because we've got to get around this corner as well. So we've got to think about how this is going to go around there, but also the fact that it's cutting back that surface so much. Now, because I've got history on there, I don't think we should go below 3 mil. That's a very small fillet. So if we want to, looking at that, looking at it from this angle, for example, we've designed an edge here, but actually the edge that we've ended up with is back here, which probably isn't what we want. It's going to end up making the aperture look bigger than we might want. What we can do there is adjust this block surface. So we can either change the angle of it, and we've got history on it, so it's easy to do, or we could move that somewhere else so that this actually looks a bit closer, but I'm first of all going to just have a look at the angle. So if we change that angle there, just see if we can reduce that. The other thing about changing the angle is that that will make that fillet look closer in size to this one, in terms of the caudal distance between those edges. So let's pull that down so you can see the fillet now moves towards the front edge. Now obviously if this is an intake, you don't want to close off the intake, otherwise there's no air going to go in. But now I've changed that angle substantially, so I've made it like 27.5 degrees. It's actually giving us a more consistent feel to those two fillets. That's still 3mm, and that's a 5mm, which is, you know, which is quite surprising when you see that. You could increase the size of this fillet, of course. That would be another option, so that we end up with those edges don't have to be exactly the same. It's just that it'll make it easier to go from one to the other. So I've made that radius 7. The other option is, because I'm now making this radius quite big, is that we go for a caudal distance, which you might think would help as well, but it really won't, because we will end up with the same sort of circular shape. The other option is we do G2, but if we go G2 on this one, then we'll end up with a minimum radius on there, which will be too tight. So I'm just going to save that. So if I go into, if I go into this one and I think, well, let's make this even, more consistent with that one, and we could go for caudal, and we'll make it G2. Yes, it'll close up the hole, it'll close up the gap, but if I was to measure the curvature there, we're going to end up with even tighter radiuses, like the unrealistic 1.9 mil, which we don't want. So I'm going to just query edit that again, and we'll go back to radius, and we'll do G1, radius 3. Radius 3 is saying 5. That's, yeah, it hadn't updated. And so in these areas, I mean, this is quite common, is that you have something like this, and then what you could do from an engineering point of view to create that intake, is we could actually have another draft surface coming back from a point down here where it's less visible, and you just put in a draft surface down here, so we actually have an intake, because I'm obviously closing off the air here, which is not the thing to do. Or we just make this draft surface very short. That's the other option, of course. Since this is a concept model, it really doesn't matter what we do. We can just chop that off and put a grill in there or something afterwards anyway. So I'm just going to leave that as it is. Like I say, we could have also brought that surface down, or a combination of the two. We could make this, it would make it more complicated, but this surface here, rather than having 8mm circular, that one, because that's a big number, I could make that a caudal distance, and make that G2, and it wouldn't be a problem, wouldn't be such a problem. So there is a center radius option, which I tend to never use, where you actually specify what the center radius is. So if I said that was 3mm, I've never used it, but this is always the first time. But you could, that's supposed to be giving us a 3mm center radius, which I'm not sure it is, but yeah, it is there. You can see minimum radius is 3mm there, so it gives us that shape. I don't tend to use that. I tend to use tangent offset. Actually, I want caudal offset. So it's because I've got radius on, so I want arc caudal. Form factor of 1 is my usual setting, and let's just have a look at that. So if I want the edge of this fillet to be down here, I need to make this a bit bigger. So let's make that 8mm. Make it 10mm. Let's make it 9mm. The reason I'm typing the numbers in is because it's just a bit quicker than trying to drag it. So when you look at the minimum radius there, the natural minimum radius is still quite big. It's 8 mil as a minimum radius. But it makes this corner slightly more complicated because you've got to then have we've got a chordal fillet, we've got a curvature matched fillet here and a round here. But maybe we'll do that one. It's going to be a challenge. And if I want to look at what that might look like, it doesn't really help when doesn't really help when I go and look at it from the back, but sometimes it does. Now I've got automatic on there, so it's trimming out things which I don't want it to do. So I'm going to do curves on surface there. Don't know where that's gone. Ah, it's come back again. Good. I'm not sure whether that's. Can't really see whether. I can't really make out whether that's there or not. Oh, it's because, of course, because everything's because those two fillets are on this surface. I'm ending up with a hole there because it's trimmed back to this one, because I've got automatic on there, so I want curves on surface on there as well. So let's go with that. So I'm going to save that. Oh, there's another option where we just offset this surface by a certain amount to give us that edge, and we do a symmetric fillet. That's another option that gives us exactly the same bottom edge. And right, let's create a new layer here. So I've seen we've got caps lock on, not that it matters. And I'm just going to pick that lot because I don't want everything else in there now. Don't need that. Remove that. And then we'll take all these locators off and all those on there. And we'll remove those curves for the time being. So the other thing that we need in here is a fillet inside here. So I'm going to go into fillet function. This one I will make curvature aligned. I'm going to make sure my normals are around the right way. If in doubt, if you can't see it, sometimes you just have to press the space bar and see what you get. But going around this corner, I don't want G1 circular, because that's going to, apart from anything else, it's not going to look so good, but it's going to cause more problems with alignment. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to make this a chordal one, and I'm just going to choose a suitable chordal length. Most of this is going to be cut off. I'm going to cut that off at some point, like I say, and we can put a mesh in there, grill in there. So on this end, I would probably go with extend rather than edge align. And we should look back at the original mesh and just see what that is showing us. If anything, oh, okay, so there's no fillet on there anyway, so that's fine. We can make something up. I think I'll make that a little bit bigger. So query edit that. It's putting a form factor of 1.5 in for some reason. We'll make that bigger. 8 mil is one of my favorite numbers when it comes to fillets for some reason. Seems to give a nice result sometimes. So we go with that. So what I want to do here is I need to put in a curve going from here to here. So I'm going to do an edit point curve here with degree 5. And hopefully we'll be able to pick up the intersect points there. So this is the usual scenario when we're doing corners, and I'll make that G2 continuous into there and G2 continuous into there, checking we've got We won't get one arrow on the end, of course, because we haven't got, it's not to an end as such, it's to an intersect. And then I want to make these CBs line up as closely as possible to these holes. The holes going down that way. Then I can activate this way. Now on this end, notice that the edge there and the hull are slightly in a different place. So when we put the points in here, we need to think about that. We actually, instead of putting them right over the hull, you want to put it slightly to the left, just like that point is in relation to the hull. So if you keep that sort of same relationship, and on that one as well, then we should end up with this one. This one doesn't seem to have the same issues because of this, because this is extended a long way. But if I measure from that to that curve to that patch, we should be quite close, I'm hoping. Or certainly closer than if we put those points exactly on those holes. 0.01019, so that's pretty close. So now if I query edit that, I might be able to just adjust that slightly to get it a little bit closer, because you have to guess, you don't know exactly what's. So that's perfectly fine anyway. So this fillet in here, I'm going to do a trim convert on that with that curve. So we'll do a trim convert on that. And I'm going to project it in the view. It doesn't matter whether it's view or normal, to be honest, and do that. And then we can align that. So we'll do an align G2. It's going to be an edge because I've already got a curve on surface there. And I want that to be a partial. And what should happen is if I pressed on there and say edge align, it should actually align with that and just make it slightly more accurate. Position influence of 0, that's fine. So we're aligning that to there, and make that an edge align as well. So we sort of guarantee that that's flowing through, hopefully. Should do the trick. I can trim this out. And I can trim this one out, I think. Yeah, just helps to see what's going on there. And this is an area now where we can actually look at it from the back and just maybe take the lines off and just see what that looks like. That looks absolutely fine. And I'm going to save that again. Now going around here, as we've done before, we want to put in a curve there, which really ought to be this curve. So, or some, close to that curve. So I'm just going to move it out of the way first, or not. And that's because I've got history on. It's not letting me move it because I'd aligned it both edges. So I'll move it out that way just so I can see where the pivot point is and move it if necessary. It doesn't matter which end I move it to, and then move it onto here. And then we can go from the front view, rotate that down a bit. So I'm going to try and imagine where this is going to cut. I'm going to cut that across here somewhere, and I want to come in at more or less 90 degrees, if possible, to these edges as much as we can. Obviously, we also need to make sure that this is like a more or less an offset of this edge here. So I need to bring it down here for a start, and then I'll scale that up. Whoa. It's very, very sudden. Good heavens. And so it doesn't want to, it's, I guess because it's so small, it's just, when I try and scale it, it's just trying to go a bit mad. I could scale it, you can scale it by hand. Obviously that's a bit time consuming, but I can go up here and put in a scale. So if I press tab, I go into there or click into there. Now it's got absolute on at the minute, and I want it relative. So if I want, in other words, the absolute, if I put in absolute and put in 1, it'll go back to the previous size. If I put in absolute of 1.5, it'll be 1.5 times as big as the original. If I want it relative to where it is, in other words, so if I put in relative, in other words, if you type in R and hit enter, and then you can put in, like, if I just put in 1, nothing will happen because it stays the same as it is. If I put in 1.1, it'll make it slightly bigger, which is a good guess, wasn't it? It's just about right now. And then we can align that G2 there with history on, so we can change things. align that into there. Doesn't matter whether I pick the curve on surface or the surface there. So we've got history on there, and then we're going to do, I'm just going to take CVs off here so we don't get those interfering, and I'm going to create some planes here like we've done before, just so that we can see this happening dynamically. So I'm picking that point, and then sliding using Control and Alt along to the end there. So we've got history on that plane, and then we can do the same again there. I'm just clicking with Control, click, and then Control and Alt sliding along the end there. So we've got history on that one, and then we can see what the intersects look like and make a judgment before we bother to trim anything out. So if I go into Surface Edit, intersect on first, it's only going to be the first surface because you can't have an intersect on a plane. So it's going to be first surface. It doesn't matter if I put both on, to be honest, because nothing will happen. So I pick that surface, then pick the plane. There's my intersect. Pick the surface, pick the plane. There's my intersect. And then, I mean, that actually looks pretty good. It's not 90 degrees, but it's close enough that that's going to be okay. And again, that one's not 90 degrees, but it's close enough to be okay. If I do want to adjust it, I should be able to do that. So if I query edit this and just pull that down a bit, maybe make that a bit closer to 90 degrees. Let's see what happens if I make it pretty much 90 degrees there, and just see what the shape of that curve is like when I do that. So if I do that on that end, because the planes are updating and the intersect updates, actually that looks pretty good. So I'm looking at the relationship of that edge to there. You know, we could either move that point, or we can of course adjust this slightly as well, just to make that better, but that helps just when we come to a line. Now these fillets here, again, I'm just going to do trim convert on that. I'm not going to bother to keep the trimmed version, but I'm going to save this. Before I go any further, because we don't want to have any upsets here. So I'll take off that, trim that one back, trim that one back. So we should, this curve on surface obviously extends far too far, as does this one, so you might as well just delete those both. It's just as quick as to realign these anyway. And the chances are, because I've done a trim convert, that we'll find that if I was to go around checking the alignment, it's probably gone off. There we go. And so we have to when you do a trim convert, usually or often you have to do a realignment anyway, because it's changed it very, very slightly. So that one, make sure the position influence is 0 on it. It is. This one I need to do a project on here. Something I didn't do, which I realized I should do. So that project obviously is rubbish because I'm doing it from Y, which doesn't make any sense. So it's going to be from normal or view or something. What I didn't check is, because I was in such a rush to do these things, I haven't actually checked that those are symmetric across the center, and it's a bit late to be doing that now. So I'm just going to save that and just see that they are, rather than actually doing checking it by putting symmetry on, which, you know, if it's out, then it's going to change things. And if I've got history on it, it's probably going to be okay, but it's probably unlikely to mess this corner up, to be honest. But I could just simply mirror that just to check it, rather than actually building it, and it gives us that, which of course is the reason for that is because I've got a plane. That's the last plane I picked, so I do need to go into the correct plane. Now this might may or may not work. Let me go and do that again. So I'll pick those surfaces, that surface and that surface. Mirror, right, let's done that. So evaluate. I put it on G2, but it doesn't actually matter whether you did that or tangency. So fortunately, that was okay. But I should have checked that at an earlier stage rather than at that point. What you will find is when you fillet things, and even though you've aligned it everywhere, when we mirror the whole thing across, you might find that the ends don't quite align. That's a possibility. when we get to that point, then that's something to worry about, but it's not very significant. It's easy to fix, but it's quite common that's what happens. So around here, I want to get rid of these. Don't really need these planes anymore. I could keep them in a construction layer. If I was working on this in reality, I probably would do that. Somewhat surprisingly, that looks a bit weird there. That doesn't actually look straight. I'm not quite sure why that is, because I trimmed that back to, so that one's absolutely fine, but that one's not quite straight, which is very odd. So having got rid of those planes, I can't bring them back, unfortunately. I wish I'd kept them now. So I'm going to just reconstruct that plane, because I don't know why that's slightly off. So I reconstructed that plane, and then so I haven't gone into that plane this time. Do that. Oh, of course, I'll tell you why it is. It's because I've aligned it. It's because I've aligned it, that's why. So let me just do that again. I'm going to trim it back to that intersect. There's always a reason. So if I say intersect there, pick that and intersect that, and it's not letting me pick that, and that's one of the things about the trim convert function, and trim for that matter. So if you've got surface in front, it doesn't always pick it, so you might end up having to go behind it to find the point where you can pick it, because there's a surface over the top of it. That's why. So let me go into SurfCon, just check that those are still aligned. So that one's gone off slightly. This is because this is this flat flat surface problem, but it's very sensitive. Now it's not wanting to align to that either, but we've only got degree 5, so we can increase the degree to 6. Now this is maybe where this started to wobble. No, that's absolutely fine. We can also say edge align, so that'll make sure that's all lined up perfectly anyway. Okay. Now this one here, I don't think I've aligned that one. Don't think I've got curve on surface there. No, I haven't. So I just want to make sure that that's the case. And so we'll align that. So this is project. And I'll just do it normal to that surface with 0 on. And let's just have a look at that end. Just make sure that that doesn't look very silly or anything. I think that's what happened on that end there, is because of the way I was projecting it. I didn't really look at it too closely when I was aligning it quite clearly. It wouldn't be a problem really if that was an SE shape. It's just that when you straighten up all of the CVs in the corner, then they're not quite in tune with each other then. So we're going to square here. So I'm going to go, first edge is going to be that curve there. The other ones, now we've got to be careful here in terms of, now what have I done here? That was supposed to be tangent, wasn't it? I'm going to just leave it as it is. I meant to keep that as tangent. Actually, the minimum radius there is only 2.5, so I've got away with it. But I didn't actually mean to do that. I meant to keep that as as just tangency, just to show you how this might go around the corner. Maybe I should do that because it's a more complicated thing going on here. If I do that, I'm just going to delete the history off that. And we'll change that down from 5 to 3, and then we're going to put our CVs on there, and I'm just going to have to align those in tangency only. It's just sometimes you get these situations, and I should show you how to do that rather than just going with the usual G2s. So that's G1. Obviously, we can only look at that in terms of G1. So I'll get rid of those locators because there's locators on top of locators there. It's very confusing. So let's continuity check, tangency. That's what we want. It's that edge, and I'll straighten that up. I can straighten that up as well. Let's have a look at that end. That looks a bit off, but I could cheat and just do this, where I just slide that point along, just visually, straight enough. And then I need to get from here to here. So you've got G2 on this one and G1 on this one. So this is slightly more complicated in a sense than usual, where normally we've, you know, I've shown you G2 to G2, and that's never, well, it's quite straightforward in a sense, because you know how these CVs are going to join up. So let's go. So this is where we need to be careful when we put in our corner. So we've got square, we've got G1 position on there. This end is G2, because that direction is G2. So if I go around picking that way, so this is G0, G2. Now this one can only be G1 at this end. So we can only specify that it's G1 in here. Although it's G2 at this end, it's only G1 there. So if we put in G2, then we'll open up a gap here. Not saying this is going to give us the right result, because we're going to have to do some more alignment to get this to work. This end, we've got G2 going that way, so that's fine. We can keep that as usual, G2. And then I've got to remember which order I pick that in. And then we want to make sure that we've got collinear on our surface edges there. So we pick that, and that. And so if I hadn't made that tangent and I put in curvature, you'll see that the left-hand side fails. Actually, it's done a pretty good job, to be honest. It's not done too badly, so it wasn't the end of the world if I did that. But the CVs look better there. I want to straighten these up. I also want to make these all edge aligned here. So if I put continuity check on, then just see what we've got there. So we've got the curvature's failed there. It's sort of, the main one that we need is this tangency. That I always like to do an align on that edge and just make sure that we've got tangency. And the reason is, so I'll take history off because we're aligning several edges here. I want to make sure that we've got tangency on there. It says we've got tangency. Again, confusingly, we've got multiple locators here. I don't know why it's kept the old one, but it has. So let's do that again. Doesn't look like that's joining up there. Ah, okay. That was a deliberate mistake. You see can you see what the mistake is that I've done? I've got a curve on surface there, and it's because I had project on there by mistake. I should have had edge on. Oh, let's revert that. So let's get rid of that curve on surface. That wasn't meant to be in there. So always in from one surface to another like this, we always want edge on, not project. Otherwise we end up with that problem that I just created for myself. So the reason I want to make sure this is aligned perfectly is that in tangency is that so that these points all align. So when I put planes in, so when I go and do this, so I'm going to make these CVs all line up with planes. Then I know that these points are in the right place before I start. So I'm going to go into planes, 3 points, that point. Oh, that's a case where it's not picked the CV, so just delete it. I do tend to find that if I've got control on, I often pick that second point rather than the first one, and I pick within the surface, and then I can just drag it to the one that I want. It's sort of, in a way, it's safer because I can see that it's snapping to those points before I even start, because otherwise I have sometimes found it snapped to the surface and I think it's on this point, but it's not. And then of course my plane doesn't work properly, and then I tidy up all the CVs, or so I think, and nothing's aligned, and I wonder why. So I'm going to go into that. Now I haven't got set CP on my menu at the minute, which I should have on my marking menu, so I do a set CP on there, put the grid on, it's a lot easier to see. Set CP, left hand view, plane rise hull. There's much more tedious going backwards and forwards between these menus. And then plane rise hull on that one. And then we go set CP there, left view, plane rise hull. So exactly the same as when we had G2 on both ends. It's the same process. You will find some corners this may not give you exactly what you want. at all. You've just got to decide whether it's right or wrong. So let's go into surface continuity there. Of course, it's so easy to forget that those was just tangency. So these are curvature, and then we want to go into that one, change it to tangency, change that to tangency. So the only one we haven't got aligned here is that one, and this top edge, we've got a curve on there. We don't want that curve in there now. We've got to align it to the surface, and so I'm going to save this once more. And then we can go and align that at end there. So this is G2 continuous, or should be. That's what we want. So that's on 1. We're not getting the curvature that we want. Going back to G1 won't help because it'll give us tangency, but it's not going to give us curvature because it's curvature that's the problem. So if I revert and go back to what we had, and we put that diagnostic on again, so make sure it's on curvature, and we've got quite a local error there. I think what I'm going to do before I do that, no, I should try and align that first. I was going to say align that top edge, but I think I should do it this way. So I'm going to put on loads of mouse sensitivity, say 500. Hopefully that's going to be enough, and just see if I can manually move these points. So I'm moving it normal. Now it's helping there. Maybe if I pull that point down, that might help. In the middle, go back to that one, move that again. Now really there's no point in going any further than this, because if I align that into there, it's going to affect those first 3 holes anyway, so that might either screw that up or make it better. I put my money on it screwing it up. So let's toggle the CPs, and then we'll align that. So this is going to be project this time, and this is going to be, can be normal, do the trick probably. So now you see this has caught me out again. This is where if you've got tangency on one of your fillets, this constantly catches me out with that situation, because it's not so common. So if we try and curvature align that top edge, of course it's going to fail here because it can only be G1 until we get to this very end here, and so we might not even bother about getting that curvature aligned into the end there at all. But obviously this one we do want to get curvature alignment on. Now if I try and move these normal to try and fix that end point, it's very unlikely that that's going to work. That's going to affect tangency there, so it's going to break the tangency probably before I get to the curvature alignment. As you can see, if I pick that point, well, that point actually is independent of this edge because it's controlling curvature on that edge, but not tangency, so we might be able to do that. This very end, I'm not even sure whether we can do that in any case by any means, because of that top edge being only tangent, and it is tiny. It's one of those tiny little areas. Obviously we could increase the degree, would be another way. Sometimes actually sliding the point along with a little less mouse sensitivity can fix it. So if I slide that left to right, that also affects the curvature. Maybe make that 500 actually. More sensitive than I thought it was. That one we have to have that white, so it's moving up and down the end tangent rather than anywhere else. It seems to flick from one to the other, which is always the most difficult ones to get rid of. I'm going to put in, say, 5,000 here. It might be that I should just up the degree. I'm probably going to do that in a second. But let's just try that point there. Yeah, it just flicks from one to the other. So I'm just going to up the degree and do it, and try and do it by a line. So let's go into object align. So we want curvature here, and we want edge on, and so we've got position inference of 1. That's what we want. So let's increase the degree. We can increase it in both directions. So let's make it 7. 7 by 7 would be perfectly fine in a direction like that. So that's got a curvature that way. It's just broken it that way. And it does say the gap's 0.005. So let's just try and align this. Bear in mind, this is tangent to this end, so we can only align it in tangency anyway, in fact. And of course, I've picked the wrong surface. Wasn't really watching what I was doing there. So this one got tangency there, and because it can only be tangency there, it'll gradually go into curvature alignment here, but it doesn't actually matter if it just says tangency on it. What's more important is this is now broken again. So if I take edge off and just try skew, that lets it relax a little bit more, and that's got a slightly better result. Let's see if we can do anything with that. Probably not, because that's going to just take us back to where we had it before. Into there. Maybe if I put skew on there. Whoa! So it's just relaxed it a little bit, rather than saying it's got to go tangent into there in terms of that line. If I just say, well, I don't really care, which is what skew's saying. I think that's the first time actually I've managed to find skew has actually helped us, but it's always worth a try. Just relaxes the solution a bit more. So we should be able to trim this out now, I think. Yeah, and then we can save that. And then we'll get rid of the controls, and we'll also delete all the locators. And I want to get rid of those planes. Don't really need those. So if I go pick component, as I said before, I have a setting like this where it's just specifically construction settings. So I'll just pick just the planes or points and things. These are just duplicates of what we had before. And so we have that as the aperture, and obviously that makes no sense having an intake which is blocked off, and so we need to do something about that. And the easiest thing to do there would just be to put in as a blank surface, so you could just shade that up as a mesh, or just make it black or whatever. So what I would do there is, the other thing I noticed I've got history on, so let's get rid of that, because once you've finished an area, you always want to delete all of the history before it causes chaos. I'm going to just do Control-C, Control-V on that, and then untrim that one, and then we'll offset that, and I'll take it back to some point down here so that we can block that off in a sort of sensible way, or semi-sensible way. So if I go into Object Edit, and I'm just going to offset that. We'll make it minus 30, so. And then if we pick all of those surfaces in there, and then we can do find the intersect between those and this main block. So I'll put it on both surfaces here. Let's try that again. So I want to pick that lot and that one, and then find the intersect on both surfaces to the offset. And then we want to yeah, actually we haven't got the bit down the center. We can trim all of these out. So I'm just doing a trim on those. Let me go into the trim function, because maybe I've got this set up with that. If you take that off, then it becomes easier, because then it's not going to get confused. These surfaces we can chuck in the bin, or you could put them into another layer if you wanted to. Now I've got a duplicate on there, so I don't need that one. That's just a duplicate, just making sure. And then this one, we can trim that down the center. So again, we could go into the sections menu and just trim that down there. So we do need 3D trimming now. Project normal would do it. And so you can see the curves and surface there. I just want to pick that one and that one. So we know about that. And then obviously we could color that in differently. And then we'll bring back body to see what all of that looks like. And I'll take my sections off. And you know this, if you want to see what that all looks like, obviously I've got the other one to do, but I've run out of time today. But if we want to see what that looks like, we can press F8 and then you get the mirrored version. You can't work in, looks like a big face now. You can't work in F8. If I try and do anything with it, if I go and pick surface, it won't let me do it. So you have to pick F8 again to get rid of it. If for some reason you wanted just the mirrored side, you can press F7. I can't see any use in that whatsoever, but F8 and F8 again will just toggle between the half model and the full model, so you don't have to put symmetry on in the layer to do it. It's just useful to be able to see what that looks like in that view. I mean, it might be that ought to be vertical rather than an offset. That would be another option. However you want to block that off, I think probably vertical might have been a better choice, to be honest.